Welcome to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Raufinkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We are joined by a fabulous guest who has come to us today, Viviana Westbrook. She is with the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, also known as Clinic. Welcome, Viviana.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad that you're here today. I want to know, what is Clinic? Can you give our viewers and our listeners a little bit of background?
Sure. So, Clinic, basically, we are the people who train the other folks who are out there doing the work, who are, filing petitions for immigrants. There's a lot of nonprofits out there that, are seeking immigration relief, that are conducting a lot of interviews with folks to see if they qualify for anything, and then they have to file a ton of petitions. And immigration law is so complex and constantly evolving. So what we do is that basically we provide the service to our affiliates, that we just train them on any of these filings they need to do. And yeah, we have loads of trainings. And then we also have an advocacy section, which is where I come in because I'm the state and local advocacy attorney there. And my role is a little bit different from the training section, which, for me, I can do any state and local advocacy as long as it impacts immigrants. It does have to come from an affiliate or from the Catholic conference directors across the various states. But, we get involved. We try to get some good things passed on the ground and try to fight the things that, are anti-immigrant.
I mean, right now we have a disastrous situation where Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are really scapegoating immigrant families. And a time when, if you look at what's happening in our economy and our families and our communities, we have never needed one another more. If you look at the care workforce, 40% of the care workforce are immigrant people. If you look at the workforce as a whole, who's starting new businesses, who's starting big businesses, who's starting to fuel the economy, all over, it's immigrants. And, also people are not only about the economy. We have many immigrants who are in our hearts and our families. And unfortunately, we have a president who is really trying to do mass human rights abuses in the name of immigration enforcement without due process. And I think that's really important when we're talking in a legal context. All of a sudden, I think this is pretty unprecedented. We have a president who's trying to throw due process out the window. Can you share with our listeners what that looks like and what that means from a legal perspective a little bit, or even an advocacy perspective?
Well, so one of the things I've been doing since the beginning of this administration is I have been doing tons of Know Your Rights presentations, but I have to change them every time. I have to update them every time I go to give a different presentation, and I give several a week, and everything's so evolving. And the fact is that then I tell people what their rights are, but then I also have to give a disclaimer about, and yet some of these rights aren't currently being observed, which is really hard to do. It's unfortunate because you'd like to think that you can tell people what their rights are and then those rights will be, respected. But, we talk about at the start of the administration, one of the things that happened was that the protected areas memo was rescinded. And this was something that had designated certain spaces as being protected from enforcement, like immigration enforcement, that there were only certain situations where, exceptions would be made. Like if somebody was, they were in the middle of a chase, right? Exceptions would be made for that. But the administration did away with it. And their messaging around it was that they were specifically going after it because they didn't want people to hide out, even though I just said, that was already an exception built into the system. So it just makes me, begs the question, like, why did you do away with this? Like these were spaces that we wanted to see protected. These were schools, these were, hospitals, of course, churches, places of worship, so important, domestic violence shelters, food pantries, emergency, places where, sometimes parents, like in Uvalde, when there was the shooting, it was CBP that was first on site. And imagine if you couldn't even see if your child was safe because you'd be worried about, being arrested there. Like that's terrible. You don't want to be detained just for checking on your child, and you shouldn't have to make that choice. But that's something that, we've been seeing. So one of the things that, even though they did away with this memo, we've been telling people, look, you still have rights. Like obviously we can't tell you the same things we would have told you with the protected areas memo, But you should know, that the Constitution still, protects you. Like if we look at the Fourth Amendment, you're being protected against searches, seizures. There is already a right to privacy, that the courts have already found. And so this becomes a question about what we are designating as private versus public. And public spaces, these are going to be accessible to anyone, and that's going to include ICE. But private spaces, you still have the right to say, no, not without a search warrant. You need to have a search warrant, or an arrest warrant signed by a judicial, either magistrate or a judge. Like you need to have that. And if you don't have that, you need to leave because you don't have the right, to be here. And we're not going to turn over someone who's, in our facility. So, we've really been trying to encourage people to get good policies around that, train people up so they understand where, like what's private, what's not, so they know where the risks are, where they're, if it's a patient or a client or, a student, like to know how to protect them, but to make sure that they're doing it all in line with the law and that they're still being there for those folks.
It's so important to know that there are so many rights, which we all have, which are being literally trampled by the Trump administration. And that is not okay. It is not okay to trample people's rights. And just to give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of context, we have a broken immigration system in the United States of America. There is no line to stand in to get immigrant status, and so what we need ultimately is a safe, orderly, and compassionate immigration system and process. And we would like our elected leaders to be working on that, not on doing things that really are illegal.